When we talk about the birth of the United States, the story usually starts with the Pilgrims in 1620. We picture a group of settlers crossing the Atlantic seeking religious freedom and laying the groundwork for a nation built on democratic ideals. But that timeline skips the real beginning. 13 years before the Mayflower ever dropped anchor, the first permanent English settlement in America was established by a corporation. It was a private, profit-driven enterprise called the Virginia Company of London. The Virginia Company was a joint stock company. In the early 17th century, colonizing a continent required more money than any single person had. So English merchants and aristocrats pooled their capital together, receiving shares proportional to their investment. Their objective was extracting wealth, hoping to duplicate the returns Spain was pulling out of South America. King James I signed the company's royal charter in 1606, granting this private entity extraordinary sovereign powers over the territory. The Virginia Company owned the land. They had the legal authority to write laws, coin money, tax the colonists, and raise armies. They were operating as an independent government. The American project began as a high-risk business plan designed to bleed a new continent dry long before it ever became a laboratory for human rights. Take a look at this Chesapeake Bay map. In 1607, employees established Jamestown on a swampy peninsula to defend against Spanish ships. Compounding the resulting malaria outbreaks, London sent wealthy gentlemen refusing manual labor, expecting easy gold and indigenous trade. They found zero gold, and relations with the local Powhatan Confederacy rapidly deteriorated into violence. Without farmers or craftsmen, the colony failed to produce enough food to survive its first winter. By the spring of 1608, only 38 of the original 104 colonists were still alive. The crisis peaked during the winter of 1609, known in colonial records as the starving time. A drought wiped out crops, a hurricane sank supply ships, the Powhatan trapped the settlers. Employees ate horses, dogs, and rats. Forensic analysis of bones excavated from the site confirms that the survivors eventually resorted to butchering and eating the bodies of their dead coworkers. Out of 500 people present at the start of that winter, barely 60 lived to see May. Facing a mortality rate near 80%, the Virginia Company was hemorrhaging capital. If they were going to avoid total bankruptcy, the leadership in London had to pivot. This is the title page of a 1612 publication called The New Life of Virginia. Part of a massive public relations campaign, the company needed a way to attract new investors and convince terrified workers to board ships headed for a death trap. Their solutions created the building blocks of the United States. Take representative government. In 1619, the company authorized the House of Burgesses, an elected legislative assembly for the colonists. This was a corporate human resources strategy, a way to give employees a stake in local management so they wouldn't quit or rebel. This split-screen model illustrates their next productivity fix, private property. On the left, we see communal farming. Originally, colonists worked company-owned land and pooled their yields, but people have little incentive to work hard for a communal store, a concept economists call the tragedy of the commons. To fix this, the company subdivided the land in 1614. As seen on the right, once they gave individuals their own parcels, the workers were working for themselves and output stabilized. Even the American agricultural economy started as a desperate cash grab. Colonist John Rolfe managed to cultivate a sweet strain of Caribbean tobacco that was wildly popular back in England. At last, the company had a viable export. But tobacco is incredibly labor-intensive. As the company subdivided more land to meet English demand, a permanent, low-cost workforce became the primary bottleneck. This economic pressure drove the transition from temporary indentured servants to a system of lifelong, racialized chattel slavery, tying the colony's profitability directly to the Atlantic slave trade. The core pillars of American society, elections, private land ownership, and a global export economy, were originally implemented as pragmatic, desperate management fixes to keep a failing corporation afloat. The company's aggressive territorial expansion for new tobacco fields finally broke the indigenous population's tolerance. On March 22, 1622, the Powhatan Confederacy launched a coordinated assault. In a single morning, attackers killed 347 colonists, roughly one-third of the workforce. The massacre halted expansion and erased any lingering possibility of peaceful coexistence. The bloodbath gave the company's political enemies in London everything they needed. King James launched a royal audit uncovering widespread financial mismanagement. By 1624, the king revoked the Virginia Company's charter entirely, placing the colony under direct royal control. The final return on investment was staggering. Of the roughly 6,000 employees sent to Virginia since 1607, about 4,800 had died. The shareholders who bankrolled the venture lost everything. By every conventional metric you could use to evaluate a business, whether employee survival, measuring investor returns, or successful strategy execution, the Virginia Company of London was an unmitigated disaster. Yet, when the royal auditors cleared out the corporate wreckage, something remained. Left behind in the ashes was a battle-hardened colony of 1,200 survivors. They had an elected assembly, a legal framework for private property, and a profitable agricultural export. 150 years later, those exact leftover corporate structures provided the constitutional and economic skeleton of the United States. Understanding this profit-obsessed history doesn't erase the achievements of the American founding. If anything, it grounds the country's origins in a harsh, pragmatic reality, stripping away the mythology to reveal the actual mechanics of how the nation was built. The modern United States emerged from the wreckage of a ruined corporate charter, the unintended byproduct of a failed commercial venture, not a master plan. America is simply what survived when a ruthless London business plan completely fell apart.